Power is not about who shouts the loudest. It is about who controls the silence. In the underworld of New York, everyone knew that Adrian Vico was the king of silence. He was a man who could end a bloodline with a subtle nod. But his fiancée, Charlotte Banks, believed that power was a tool, to be flaunted, a weapon to hurt those beneath her. She thought the world was her playground, and everyone else was just scenery. She was wrong. She made the mistake of thinking the quiet girl pouring the wine was just a waitress. She didn't know that some people hide in the shadows, not because they are afraid, but because they are hunting. This is the story of how a spilled glass of champagne toppled an empire. The rain over Manhattan was relentless, hammering against the bulletproof windows of the Phantom 8 Rolls-Royce as it pulled up to the curb. The valet, a young man shivering in his uniform, rushed forward with an umbrella, but the woman stepping out didn't even acknowledge his existence. Charlotte Banks adjusted her white mink coat, her eyes scanning the entrance of L'Obsidian with a look of perpetual dissatisfaction. On her finger, a 10-carat diamond sat heavy and cold, a promise ring from the man following her out of the car. Adrian Vico emerged into the New York night. He was a man built of sharp angles and bespoke Italian wool. He didn't look at the valet, or the passers-by, or the flashing lights of the city. His eyes were dark, devoid of the sparkle that lived in Charlotte's. He was the don of the Vico crime family, the invisible hand that moved the chess pieces of the Eastern Seaboard's logistics and shipping unions. "Do try to look alive, Adrian," Charlotte snapped, linking her arm through his. "This serves the best truffle risotto in the city, and I need to be seen. The senator's wife is supposed to be here." Adrian said nothing. He simply checked his Patek Philippe watch, a subtle tick of annoyance in his jaw. He was a man of business. Charlotte was his business partner's daughter. The engagement was a merger, not a romance. It was a bridge between the Vico muscle and the bank's political influence. He tolerated her vanity because it was profitable. Inside L'Obsidian was a sanctuary of gold leaf and velvet. The air smelled of expensive perfume, seared scallops, and old money. The maitre d', a sweating man named Pierre, bowed low. "Mr. Vico, Ms. Banks, your usual table is ready. The private alcove near the fireplace." "Finally," Charlotte huffed, brushing past him. "And tell the staff not to hover tonight. The service last time was atrocious." Pierre nodded nervously. "Of course, madame. We have assigned Maeve to your table tonight. She is our most discreet and efficient server." Adrian's eyes flickered. He didn't care about servers. He cared about the distinct lack of security at the back exit he had noted upon entry. He sat down, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room out of habit. Maeve Reeves approached the table. She was nondescript in the best way possible. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face devoid of makeup. She moved with a strange, fluid grace, making no sound on the plush carpet. She held a bottle of Dom Perignon, 2012 vintage, with practiced ease. "Good evening, Mr. Vico, Ms. Banks," Maeve said. Her voice was low, steady, and utterly calm. "Sparkling or still water to start?" Charlotte didn't look up from her phone. "Just pour the champagne, and don't fill it to the brim like a peasant. Halfway." Maeve nodded and began to pour. Her hand was steady. "So," Charlotte said, finally looking at Adrian, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "Daddy says the union deal is stalling. He thinks you're losing your touch." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Your father should worry about his polls. I handle the streets." Well, maybe the streets need a firmer hand. Charlotte laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. She gestured wildly with her hand, forgetting the proximity of the crystal flute Maeve was filling. Her fake nail clipped the edge of the bottle. It happened in slow motion. The bottle didn't fall, but the flute tipped. A splash of gold liquid cascaded over the edge of the table, landing squarely on Charlotte's limited edition Hermès Birkin bag, sitting on the extra chair. Silence slammed into the room. It was absolute and terrifying. The clinking of silverware stopped at the surrounding tables. Charlotte stared at the wet spot on the leather. Her face turned a shade of red that matched the lobster on the neighboring table. She looked up at Maeve, her eyes wide with a venomous rage. "You stupid, clumsy little cow," Charlotte hissed. Maeve didn't flinch. She set the bottle down on the side table and immediately produced a linen cloth from her apron. "I apologize, Miss Banks." "Let me smack." The sound echoed through the restaurant. Charlotte had backhanded Maeve across the face. Maeve's head whipped to the side. A small trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her lip, but she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't drop the cloth. She slowly turned her head back to face Charlotte. Her expression hadn't changed. It was still blank, but her eyes had shifted. They were no longer the eyes of a waitress. They were the eyes of a soldier assessing a threat. "My bag is worth more than your entire life," Charlotte screamed, standing up and knocking her chair back. "Adrian, look at this." She ruined the leather. Adrian remained seated, sipping his water. He watched Maeve. He had seen men take beatings in basements who showed more fear than this girl. "It is just champagne, Charlotte," Adrian said, his voice bored. "It will dry." "It is about respect," Charlotte shrieked. She grabbed a glass of water from the table and threw it in Maeve's face. The ice cubes hit Maeve's cheekbone with a crack. Water soaked her white shirt. "Get on your knees," Charlotte commanded, pointing a manicured finger at the floor. "Clean it up, with your hair if you have to. Show me you understand your place." The entire restaurant was watching. Pierre, the manager, was running over, looking like he was about to faint. Maeve stood dripping wet, the red mark on her cheek throbbing. She looked at the floor, then at Charlotte, and finally her eyes locked with Adrian's. For a second, Adrian felt a chill go down his spine. It wasn't attraction. It was recognition. Maeve didn't kneel. Instead, she took a step forward, invading Charlotte's personal space. "I will fetch a leather specialist from the back," Maeve said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the customer service lilt. "But I will not kneel. Not for you." Charlotte laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "Did you hear that, Adrian? She won't kneel. She thinks she has a choice." She turned to Pierre, who had arrived breathless at the table. "Fire her, now, and ensure she never works in this city again. I want her blacklisted from every diner, cafe, and hot dog stand in Manhattan." Pierre was shaking. "Ms. Banks, please, Maeve is our best." "Do it!" Charlotte slammed her hand on the table. "Pack your things, Maeve," Pierre whispered, unable to look her in the eye. "I'm sorry." Maeve untied her apron slowly. She didn't look defeated. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on the empty chair. "Very well," Maeve said. She turned to leave, but Charlotte wasn't done. She wanted blood. She wanted the total destruction of the girl's dignity. "Wait," Charlotte snapped. "I didn't say you could leave. You haven't paid for the damage." She looked at Adrian. "Honey, call your boys. Make sure she understands what happens when you damage our property." Adrian frowned. This was messy. It was beneath him. "Charlotte, enough. Let the girl go." "No." Charlotte was drunk on the adrenaline of her own tantrum. She grabbed Maeve's arm. "You don't walk away from me." Maeve's reaction was instantaneous. In a blur of motion, she twisted her wrist, breaking Charlotte's grip with a technique that was too precise to be accidental. She didn't hurt Charlotte, but she neutralized the hold instantly. Charlotte stumbled back, gasping. Maeve adjusted her cuff. She looked at Adrian, ignoring Charlotte entirely. "Mr. Vico," Maeve said, "control your second. She is violating the sanctity of Tregua." Adrian froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Tregua, the truce, it was an old term, a very old term. It referred to the neutral ground rules established by the five families in the 1980s. Restaurants of a certain caliber were considered Switzerland. No business, no violence, no disrespect. It was a rule that had largely been forgotten by the younger generation of mobsters, but the old guard and the people who served them knew it well. "What did you say?" Adrian asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You heard me," Maeve said. She wiped the blood from her lip with her thumb. "We are in a place of dining. You do not bring the street into the kitchen. That is the rule of the Vico grandfather. Or have you forgotten the laws written by Luca Vico?" The room felt suddenly colder. Charlotte looked confused. What is she babbling about? Adrian hit her, but Adrian was standing up now. He towered over the table. He looked at Maeve, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the calluses on her knuckles. He saw the way she stood, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move. "Who are you?" Adrian asked. "Just a waitress who knows her history," Maeve replied, "and someone who knows that a man who cannot control his woman cannot control his territory." Charlotte gasped. "You little—" "Enough!" Adrian's voice was like a whip crack. He held up a hand, silencing Charlotte instantly. He stared at Maeve. "You know Luca Vico's laws. I know that L'Obsidian pays protection to the Vico family," Maeve stated flatly. "And part of that protection includes the dignity of the staff. If you allow her to humiliate me here, you break the contract. You show weakness. The sharks in Brooklyn will hear that Adrian Vico lets civilians run his operations." It was a bold, suicidal gamble. But it was true. Adrian stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Pierre," Adrian said, never breaking eye contact with Maeve. "Yes, Mr. Vico." "Put the meal on my tab. Add a $5,000 tip for the lady." Charlotte's jaw dropped. "Adrian, are you insane?" "And Pierre," Adrian continued, "she is not fired. If she is not here when I return next week, I will assume you have disrespected me. And you know what happens then?" Pierre nodded frantically. "Yes, Mr. Vico. Of course." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a handkerchief silk monogrammed, and handed it to Maeve. "For the blood," he said. Maeve hesitated, then took it. "Thank you, Don Vico." She didn't call him Mr. Vico this time. She used the title. Adrian turned to Charlotte, his face hardening into stone. "Get in the car, Charlotte. We are leaving." "But I haven't eaten. I want her head. Get in the car." Charlotte, recognizing the tone of voice that usually preceded someone disappearing into the Hudson River, grabbed her wet Birkin bag and stormed out, shooting one last hateful glare at Maeve. As Adrian walked past Maeve, he paused. He leaned in close, his cologne sandalwood and gunpowder filling her senses. "You play a dangerous game, waitress," he whispered. "I'll be seeing you." "I'm not hiding," Maeve whispered back. 3 days later, the rain had cleared, but the storm inside Adrian Vico's office was just beginning. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk on the top floor of the Vico Enterprises building in Midtown. The view of the skyline was breathtaking, but Adrian was focused on a single manila folder in front of him. "You're telling me," Adrian said, looking up at his consigliere, a balding man named Bruno, "that she doesn't exist?" Bruno wiped sweat from his forehead. "Boss, I ran her fingerprints from the glass she touched. I ran facial recognition. I ran the name Maeve Reeves. It's a ghost build. Social Security number was issued 3 years ago in Ohio. Before that, nothing. No high school records, no birth certificate, no family." Adrian leaned back, tapping a pen against his chin. "A ghost serving risotto." "She works hard," Bruno continued. "Lives in a small studio in Queens. Pays cash. No boyfriend. No pets. But boss? The footage." "Show me." Bruno tapped a tablet and slid it across the desk. It was security footage from the alleyway behind L'Obsidian taken 2 nights ago. The grainy black and white video showed Maeve taking out the trash. 3 men approached her low-level street thugs, likely looking for a wallet, or worse. On the screen, one man grabbed Maeve's shoulder. Adrian watched with intensity. Maeve didn't scream. She dropped the trash bag. In 3 seconds, literally. 3 seconds, 2 men were on the ground, clutching their knees, and the third was pinned against the brick wall with his own knife pressed against his throat. She said something to the man, released him, and he ran as if the devil himself was chasing him. Maeve then picked up the trash bag, threw it in the dumpster, and walked back inside as if she had just swatted a fly. "Krav Maga," Adrian murmured. "Or Systema. That's military grade." "Or assassin grade," Bruno suggested darkly. "Boss, if she's a plant from the Russo family." "If she was a plant, she would have let Charlotte humiliate her to keep her cover," Adrian countered. "Spies try to blend in." She stood up. She quoted the old laws. "That's pride. That's heritage." "What do you want to do? I want to know who trained her, and I want to know why she's hiding in a restaurant." Meanwhile, in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, Charlotte Banks was not letting it go. She was pacing her living room, a glass of Chardonnay in hand, talking to her brother Tobias. Tobias was the opposite of Adrian. Where Adrian was calculated violence, Tobias was chaotic stupidity. He was a gambler, a user, and desperate for his sister's approval. "I want her gone, Toby," Charlotte hissed. "Adrian humiliated me because of that servant. He gave her $5 grand. He looked at her like she was an equal. So get her fired." Tobias shrugged, counting a stack of cash he owed to a bookie. "I tried. Adrian protected her. He threatened the manager." Charlotte chugged the wine. "I need you to scare her. Nothing permanent. Well, maybe a broken arm. Just enough so she can't carry a tray. I want her to know she can't touch me." Tobias grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "You want me to rough up a waitress? That's easy money, Charlie. Consider it done." Charlotte smiled, a cruel, satisfied curling of her red lips. "Make sure she knows it's from me. I want her to beg." Back at L'Obsidian, Maeve was polishing silverware in the back. She felt the eyes on her. The other staff members were terrified of her now. They whispered when she walked by. She picked up a heavy silver knife, seeing her reflection in the blade. "Stay low, Sarah," she told herself, using her real name in the safety of her mind. "You promised him you'd stay low." She touched the locket hidden beneath her uniform. Inside was a picture of an older man with sad eyes, the cleaner. The man who had cleaned up the Vico family's messes for 40 years until they betrayed him. She wasn't there to kill Adrian Vico, not yet. She was there to find the ledger her father had hidden before he died. The ledger that proved the Vico family didn't just run gambling, they were trafficking weapons to enemies of the state. But she hadn't anticipated Charlotte Banks. And she hadn't anticipated that Adrian Vico would be honorable. The back door creaked open. Maeve didn't turn around. "Delivery is in the morning, Pierre." Not a delivery, sweetheart. It wasn't Pierre. It was Tobias, and he had brought 2 friends. They stepped into the kitchen, locking the door behind them. The chefs had already left for the night. It was just Maeve. "My sister sends her regards." Tobias sneered, pulling a collapsible baton from his jacket. Maeve sighed, setting the silver knife down gently on the velvet cloth. "Let me guess," she said, turning around slowly. "Charlotte? Smart girl." Tobias laughed. "This is gonna hurt." Maeve looked at the 3 men. Then she looked at the security camera in the corner. She picked up a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. "You boys have made a mistake," she said, her voice dropping to that lethal calm again. "You brought toys. I'm in a kitchen. Everything here is a weapon." As Tobias lunged, the back door exploded inward. It wasn't Maeve who moved. Adrian Vico stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the streetlights, a suppressed pistol in his hand. "Drop it," Adrian commanded. Tobias froze. Adrian, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're harassing my staff." Adrian stepped into the light. "And violating my territory." Maeve looked at Adrian. She hadn't needed saving. She had the skillet. She had the training. But for the first time in 5 years, someone had stepped in front of her instead of behind her. "I can handle this," Maeve said to Adrian. "I know." Adrian replied, holstering his gun but keeping his eyes on Tobias. "But tonight I'm not the customer. I'm the owner." The silence in the kitchen of L'Obsidian was heavier than the cast-iron skillet in Maeve's hand. Tobias Banks, usually so loud and arrogant, was shrinking against the stainless steel prep table, his baton clattering to the floor. Adrian Vico didn't yell. That was the thing about Adrian that terrified people. His anger didn't manifest as noise, it manifested as absolute, freezing calm. He walked over to Tobias, his polished shoes crunching on a stray piece of lettuce. "You brought weapons into my establishment," Adrian said softly. "You threatened a woman under my protection, and you used my fiancée's name to do it." "She asked me to—" Tobias stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Charlotte said this girl disrespected her. I was just teaching her a lesson, Adrian. We're family, right?" Adrian grabbed Tobias by the lapels of his expensive jacket and slammed him against the industrial refrigerator. The impact rattled the heavy metal door. "We are not family," Adrian whispered, his face inches from Tobias's. "I am marrying your sister for a contract that relies on the Banks family maintaining their dignity. Thugs beat women in alleys. Kings protect their territory. You are acting like a thug, Tobias." Adrian released him with a shove. "Get out. If I see you in this borough again, I will have Bruno remove your kneecaps. Tell your sister that her debt has just increased." Tobias scrambled for the door, abandoning his 2 hired muscles who were already backing away, hands raised in surrender. They fled into the night, leaving Adrian and Maeve alone in the stark, fluorescent light of the kitchen. Maeve hadn't moved. She still held the skillet, her breathing controlled her eyes, tracking Adrian's every micro-movement. Adrian turned to her. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by that calculating curiosity. He looked at the skillet, then up to her face. "You wouldn't have used the skillet," Adrian observed. "You were shifting your weight to your back leg. You were going to kick the knife out of the first guy's hand." Maeve set the pan down slowly. A skillet is good for distraction. A kick is good for incapacitation. Who trained you? Adrian asked again. And don't tell me it was a self-defense class at the YMCA. Maeve hesitated. She was at a crossroads. She could lie, and he would investigate until he found the truth. Or she could give him a piece of the truth, just enough to stay close, just enough to get to that ledger. My father, she said quietly. He believed that the world was a dangerous place for a girl. He taught me how to be invisible, and how to hurt people who try to make me visible against my will. And where is your father now? Dead. Maeve lied. Well, half lied. He was dead to the world, buried under a pseudonym. A work accident. Adrian nodded slowly. He walked over to the counter, picked up the silver knife Maeve had been polishing, and inspected it. You are wasted here, Maeve. Pouring wine for ungrateful socialites. He placed the knife down. I have a proposition. Maeve stiffened. I don't do private dances, Mr. Vico. Adrian laughed, a rare, dry sound. I don't want a dancer. I have plenty of those. I need someone who can see things others miss. Someone who can stand in a room full of sharks and not bleed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. It was black with gold embossing. My head housekeeper at the Vico estate just retired. It's a live-in position. Triple your current salary. Full benefits. And you answer only to me. Maeve stared at the card. The Vico estate. That was where the main office was. That was where the safe would be. That was where the ledger was hidden. It was the breaks she had been praying for handed to her on a silver platter by the man she was supposed to be hunting. Why? She asked. Why hire a waitress to run your house? Because, Adrian said, walking toward the back exit, Charlotte hates you, and I find that having you around might be the only thing that makes my engagement bearable. Plus, I have a feeling you're the best security system money can't buy. He paused at the door. Be at the estate at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. Maeve watched him leave. She looked at the card in her hand. The game had just moved from the pawns to the knights. She was going into the lion's den, and she wasn't sure if she was the hunter or the prey. The Vico estate was not a home. It was a fortress dressed in marble and ivy. Located in the rolling hills of Westchester, it was surrounded by 12-foot walls and patrolled by men in dark suits who looked like they were made of granite. Maeve arrived in a taxi carrying a single duffel bag. She passed the security check with ease. Adrian had already cleared her. The interior was cold, modern, and immaculate. It lacked warmth, much like its owner. As Maeve was shown to her quarters, a spacious suite near the kitchen, she immediately began to map the house in her mind. Exits, cameras, blind spots, floor squeaks. For 2 weeks, Maeve played the role perfectly. She organized the staff, managed the inventory, and remained invisible. She wore a simple black uniform, kept her head down, and spoke only when spoken to. But at night, she hunted. Using a signal jammer she had built from spare radio parts, she disabled the hallway cameras for 3-minute intervals, just enough time to slip into the West Wing, where Adrian's office was located. She searched the filing cabinets. Nothing. She checked behind the paintings. Nothing. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the calm was shattered. Charlotte Banks arrived unannounced. She swept into the foyer like a hurricane, followed by an entourage of stylists and wedding planners. "I want the drapes changed to crimson," Charlotte shouted at a terrified maid. "And get rid of that ugly rug." Then she saw Maeve. Maeve was arranging a vase of lilies on the center table. Charlotte stopped dead in her tracks. Her face went pale, then purple. You Charlotte whispered. "What is she doing here?" Adrian walked down the grand staircase, buttoning his cuffs. "She works for me, Charlotte. She runs the house." "You hired the help that assaulted my brother," Charlotte shrieked. "Are you trying to humiliate me?" "Your brother assaulted himself with his own stupidity," Adrian said calmly. "Maeve is efficient. Something this house needs." Charlotte marched up to Maeve, poking her in the chest with a sharp finger. "I don't know what you did to bewitch him, you little gutter rat, but I will not have you here. I am the future Mrs. Vico. This is my house." Maeve looked at the finger on her chest. She wanted to snap it. Instead, she took a step back and lowered her head. "I am just here to ensure the household runs smoothly, Miss Banks." "Smoothly." Charlotte grabbed the vase of lilies and hurled it onto the marble floor. Water and glass exploded everywhere. "Oops, it seems you missed a spot. Clean it up." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Charlotte." "No, Adrian." Charlotte spun on him. "It's her or me. I won't have this spy in our home." The word hung in the air. Spy. Maeve's heart skipped a beat. Did she know? "She's staring at me," Charlotte screamed. "Look at her eyes." "She's not a maid, Adrian. She's plotting something. I can feel it." "You're paranoid," Adrian sighed. "She stays. Now are we going to the tasting, or are you going to continue breaking my antiques?" Charlotte glared at Maeve with pure hatred. "Fine. But mark my words, one slip-up, one missing silver spoon, and I will have you arrested." They left. Maeve knelt to pick up the glass shards. As she reached for a large piece, she noticed something under the heavy oak table in the hallway. A loose floorboard. It wasn't visible from standing height, but from down here on her knees, she could see the misalignment. That night she returned. She pried the board open. There was no ledger, but there was a hard drive. She took it back to her room and plugged it into her encrypted laptop. The files were password protected, but the hint was the day the music died. Maeve paused. It was the date her father had disappeared. May 12th. She typed in 0512. Access granted. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents. It wasn't just a ledger of gambling debts. It was a log of payoffs. To judges, to police captains, and at the very top of the list, receiving monthly payments of $500,000, was a name that made Maeve's blood run cold. Senator William Banks, Charlotte's father. The Vico family wasn't the head of the snake. They were the muscle. The Banks family. The politicians, the respectable ones, were the masterminds. Adrian wasn't the villain Maeve thought he was. He was being extorted. The marriage wasn't a merger. It was a hostage situation. Suddenly, the door to her room clicked open. Maeve slammed the laptop shut and spun around, sliding a knife from her sleeve. It was Adrian. He stood in the doorway looking tired. He wasn't angry. He looked resigned. "I knew you weren't a housekeeper," he said softly. The glow of the laptop screen cast a ghostly blue pallor over Maeve's face. The progress bar crawled agonizingly slowly. Decryption, 98%. 99%. Outside her door, the Vico estate was silent, a sleeping beast of stone and velvet. Inside Maeve's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had found the loose floorboard under the hallway table, retrieved the hidden drive, and now finally the truth was unfolding before her eyes. Access granted. Maeve didn't breathe as she scrolled through the documents. She had expected to find a list of Adrian Vico's sins, illegal gambling rings, racketeering the dirty money that had allegedly ruined her father, the cleaner. She was ready to see the proof that the Vicos were the monsters she had been trained to hunt. But the spreadsheet didn't list Adrian's profits. It listed his extortions. Recipient Senator William Banks, monthly installment $500,000. Recipient Judge H.P. Calloway, monthly installment $50,000. Recipient Commissioner O'Hara, monthly installment $75,000. Maeve's fingers hovered over the trackpad. The dates went back 10 years. The Vico family wasn't the head of the snake. They were the prey. They were being bled dry by the very people who claimed to stand for law and order. And at the center of the web was Senator Banks, Charlotte's father. The marriage isn't a merger, Maeve whispered to herself, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. It's a hostage situation. Suddenly, the silence of the room was shattered. The electronic lock on her bedroom door beeped a sharp, high-pitched tone that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. Maeve reacted on instinct. She slammed the laptop shut, spun around, and in one fluid motion slid a ceramic throwing knife from her sleeve. She dropped into a defensive crouch, ready to strike. The door clicked open. Adrian Vico stood in the threshold. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly. He wore a loose white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar sleeves, rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked tired, bone-deep tired. He didn't look surprised to see the knife. "I knew you weren't a housekeeper," Adrian said softly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The lock engaged with a heavy thud. Maeve didn't lower the weapon. "Stay back. You walk too softly for a maid," Adrian continued, ignoring her command and walking calmly toward the window. "You check the exits every time you enter a room. You memorize the guard rotations. And you have been hacking my internal security system for 2 weeks. I let it slide because I was curious." "Curious?" Maeve scoffed, her grip tightening on the ceramic hilt. "Or arrogant?" "Curious," he repeated, turning to face her. "I wanted to know who sent you. The Russos. The FBI. But then I saw you looking at the old photos in the hallway. You weren't looking for money. You were looking for ghosts." He gestured to the laptop on the desk. "And now I think you know the truth. You're not here to kill me, are you?" Maeve hesitated. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, urging her to fight, but the evidence on the screen had changed the battlefield. "I came for the ledger." Maeve admitted, her voice low and dangerous. "I came to clear my father's name. He was the cleaner. 40 years of service and your family threw him to the wolves to save yourselves." Adrian's expression shifted. The mask of the Don slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine pain. "The cleaner. I remember him. He gave me my first switchblade." "Your father sold him out," Maeve spat. "My father was a coward," Adrian corrected, his voice hardening. "He sold your father out to Senator Banks to keep himself out of prison. I was 18 when it happened. I had no say. I inherited a throne built on quicksand." He walked over to the desk and tapped the closed laptop. "That drive, it proves that Senator Banks has been holding a gun to my head for a decade. He threatens to use his DOJ connections to imprison my men, good men, loyal men, if we don't pay. This marriage to Charlotte, it's his final guarantee. Once I marry her, he controls the Vico assets legally. I become a figurehead, a puppet." "So you're a victim?" Maeve asked, skepticism lacing her tone. "I am a prisoner," Adrian said, his eyes burning with a cold blue fire. "But I am planning a jailbreak." He looked at Maeve, assessing her. "Tomorrow night is the engagement gala. Every major crime boss and politician in New York will be there. Senator Banks will be there. And what are you going to do? I'm going to kill the Alliance, Adrian said. I need the original physical ledger, the one Banks keeps in a briefcase, handcuffed to his wrist. The digital copy is good for leverage, but the physical book contains the handwritten notes, the signatures. That is the bullet that kills his career. Why tell me? Maeve asked. I could send this to the press right now. Because you can't get close enough to Banks to get the physical book. And I can't leave the podium, Adrian replied. I need someone no one suspects, someone invisible, someone who can stand in a room full of sharks and not bleed. Maeve looked at him. She saw the desperation he hid so well behind his bespoke suits and icy demeanor. He was asking her to trust the enemy of her father, to take down the man who actually destroyed him. If I help you, Maeve said, lowering the knife slowly. I get the original physical ledger, the one that exonerates my father, and I walk away. No retribution. You have my word, Adrian said solemnly, and a Vico never breaks his word to a partner. The following night, the Vico estate was transformed. The austere, cold marble of the main hall was draped in crimson velvet and gold silk. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos, ball gowns, and forced smiles. The air smelled of expensive perfume, imported orchids, and the metallic tang of betrayal. It was the engagement gala, the Red Gala. Charlotte Banks was the centerpiece. She wore a blood-red gown that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Diamonds dripped from her neck and ears, flashing blindingly under the lights. She clung to Adrian's arm, preening for the flashing cameras of the social press, her smile tight and victorious. Adrian looked the part of the devoted fiancé, but his eyes were cold, scanning the room, calculating. Senator Banks held court near the open bar. He was a man who wore power like a second skin, expansive, loud, and utterly corrupt. He was shaking hands with the very judges he was bribing, his laugh booming over the string quartet. And Maeve was invisible. She moved through the crowd in her black server's uniform, a tray of champagne flutes balanced perfectly on one hand. Her hair was pulled back, her face devoid of makeup, her demeanor subservient. But in her right ear, concealed by a strand of hair, was a tiny, high-tech earpiece. Target is moving to the library. Adrian's voice crackled in her ear, barely a whisper. He has the briefcase. He never lets it out of his sight. Maeve didn't look at Adrian. She kept her eyes down. I see him. He's flanked by 2 security detail. I'll pull the security, Adrian said. Watch for the signal. Maeve watched as Adrian gracefully extricated himself from Charlotte's grip. He walked over to the head of security and whispered something. Moments later, the 2 guards flanking Senator Banks tapped their earpieces and moved toward the front entrance, leaving the senator exposed. Banks, confident in his untouchability, didn't notice. He turned and headed toward the private library for a meeting. Maeve slipped into the service corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway. She moved fast, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the parquet floor. She reached the library service entrance just as Banks walked in through the main doors. She cracked the door open an inch. Inside, Banks was meeting with Don Russo, the head of the rival family. The wedding is in 3 days, Banks was saying, pouring himself a scotch with his free hand. The briefcase sat on the floor, touching his leg. After that, Adrian is irrelevant. We can liquidate him within the month. A tragic boating accident, perhaps. Charlotte inherits the empire. I control her, I control the ports. Maeve's breath hitched. They weren't just planning a takeover. They were planning an execution. And the girl? Russo asked, his voice gravelly. The waitress. She caused a scene at the restaurant. It makes us look weak. Banks chuckled a dark, wet sound. Charlotte has arranged for her to have an accident tonight. Something tragic. A fall down the service stairs. She's become inconvenient. Maeve's grip tightened on her tray until her knuckles turned white. They were going to kill her. Tonight. Now, Banks said, setting his glass down. Let's discuss the territory split. Maeve knew she had seconds. She couldn't fight them both, not with armed guards likely just outside the main door. She needed chaos. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket. She had hacked the estate's environmental controls hours ago. "Burn it down," she whispered. She tapped the screen. Beep, beep, beep. The fire alarm screamed through the house, a deafening, pulsing shriek. Strobe lights began to flash in the hallway. Banks and Russo jumped, confused. "What the hell is that?" Banks yelled, looking around wildly. "Is it a raid?" In the confusion, Maeve moved. She didn't walk. She exploded into motion. She burst from the hidden service door, a blur of black uniform. Before Banks could process the movement, Maeve had rolled across the Persian rug. She grabbed the handle of the briefcase. It wasn't handcuffed to him. He had unclipped it to pour his drink. "Hey!" Banks screamed, dropping his glass. Maeve didn't stop. She grabbed the heavy leather case and sprinted for the side door that led to the East Wing corridor. "Security, stop her!" Banks bellowed, his face turning a shade of purple. Maeve burst into the hallway, the heavy briefcase banging against her leg. The alarm was still blaring, masking the sound of her footsteps. She needed to get to the rendezvous point, the main staircase. She turned the corner, sprinting full tilt, and skidded to a halt. Blocking her path was a wall of muscle in a tuxedo. It was Tobias Banks, and he was holding a gun. "Going somewhere." Tobias grinned, his teeth yellow and predatory. "Charlotte told me you might try to steal the silver. Looks like you took the whole bag." Maeve froze. She was trapped. Behind her, she could hear the heavy thud of Banks's security team approaching. In front of her, a man who wanted her dead. "Move, Tobias," she warned, dropping the briefcase and shifting her stance. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I really do," Tobias sneered. "I've been waiting for this since the kitchen." He raised the gun, aiming for her chest. Bang! The gunshot tore through the hallway louder than the alarm. Maeve flinched instinctively, bringing her arms up, but she felt no impact, no pain. She opened her eyes. Tobias looked down, a look of utter shock plastered on his face. A crimson stain was spreading rapidly on his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor as he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Standing behind him at the far end of the hall was Charlotte Banks. She held a small, pearl-handled pistol. Her hand was shaking violently, but her eyes were wide, manic, and terrifying. Maeve stared at her horrified. "You shot him. He was in the way." Charlotte stammered, her voice trembling. She stepped over her groaning brother as if he were a piece of furniture. She looked at Maeve, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by a rabid hunger. "Give me the briefcase." "You shot your own brother?" Maeve asked, unable to comprehend the madness. "He was helping you." "He's an idiot!" Charlotte screamed, the veneer of the socialite shattering completely. "Daddy says I'm the heir. If I get that briefcase, I control everything. Not Daddy, not Adrian. Me, I'll be the queen, I won't be the trophy anymore." She raised the pearl-handled gun, pointing it directly at Maeve's forehead. "Give it to me. I saw you take it. I know what's in there. Daddy's insurance policy. If I have it, they all have to bow to me." Charlotte had gone mad with the proximity to power. She didn't care about the family or the marriage or the money. She wanted the crown, and she would kill anyone to get it. Charlotte put the gun down. Adrian's voice boomed from the top of the stairs. He had arrived, followed by 4 of his most loyal lieutenants. "Stay back, Adrian." Charlotte waved the gun wildly between Maeve and Adrian. "I win. I finally win. Look at me. I did what you couldn't do." Maeve looked at Adrian. They locked eyes across the hallway. In that split second, a silent communication passed between them. A plan formed. Distraction. Maeve tightened her grip on the briefcase handle. "You want it, Charlotte?" Maeve yelled. "Catch!" Maeve heaved the heavy briefcase into the air, throwing it in a high arc towards the ceiling. Charlotte's eyes instinctively followed the prize, her greed overriding her tactical sense. The gun wavered, pointing up. In that split second, Maeve closed the distance. She didn't use a strike. She used pure precision. She stepped inside Charlotte's guard, grabbed the wrist holding the gun, and twisted violently outward. Snap! Charlotte shrieked as the gun fell from her hand. Maeve didn't stop. She swept Charlotte's legs out from under her. Charlotte hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of her. The briefcase landed with a heavy, ominous thud next to her head. Maeve stood over her, breathing hard. She kicked the pearl-handled pistol across the floor, away from Charlotte's reach. "You don't have the temperament for the throne, Charlotte," Maeve said, coldly looking down at the sobbing woman. "A queen protects her blood. She doesn't spill it." Adrian stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the marble. He picked up the briefcase. He checked the lock. It was secure. Senator Banks came running around the corner, red-faced, sweating and flanked by his guards. He stopped dead when he saw the tableau, his son bleeding against the wall, his daughter weeping on the floor, and Adrian Vico holding the evidence of his crimes. "Adrian!" the senator gasped, holding up his hands. "Now, let's be reasonable. We can discuss this. Reasonable." Adrian looked at the senator with pure disgust. He didn't even draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He held the briefcase up. "Reasonable is me handing this to the FBI tonight. Reasonable is me letting the sharks in Brooklyn know you're the one who sold them out in '98. The senator paled. "Adrian, please. The marriage, the engagement is off." Adrian cut him off, his voice like a gavel striking a sounding block. "You will resign from the Senate tomorrow for health reasons. You will liquidate your assets and transfer the funds to the account I provide. And you will never step foot in New York again." "And if I refuse," Banks whispered, looking at his guards. "Then I open the case," Adrian said simply. "And I release the pages about the judges and the police commissioner. You won't go to jail, William. You'll be dead within the hour." The senator looked at his children, his legacy broken on the floor. He looked at Maeve, the waitress who had outplayed him. He slumped defeated, the air leaving his lungs. "Done," he whispered. Adrian turned to Maeve. He didn't smile, but he nodded. A nod of respect. A nod of partnership. The war was over. The cleanup was just beginning. The fall of the House of Banks was not a loud explosion, but a slow, suffocating crumble. For weeks, the headlines were dominated by the abrupt retirement of Senator William Banks due to unspecified health issues, a polite euphemism for political execution. The scandal was surgically precise. The Vico family's operations remained untouched, a phantom in the night, while the Banks family's assets were frozen, seized, or dissolved. Charlotte Banks had been shipped off to Paris, exiled to a life of quiet irrelevance, stripped of the influence she had wielded like a cudgel. 1 month later, the autumn rain returned to New York, washing away the grime of the city, but leaving the steel and stone glistening with a renewed, dangerous edge. Maeve stood on the tarmac of the private airfield in New Jersey, the wind whipping the hem of her trench coat against her legs. The scent of jet fuel and damp asphalt filled the air. Over her shoulder hung a single battered duffel bag, the same one she had arrived with. Inside, tucked safely in a waterproof pouch, was the digital copy of the exoneration papers. Her father was free. The debt was paid. The mission was over. She looked at the small Cessna waiting to take her north. It looked like safety. It looked like a quiet life, where the only sharp objects were bread knives and the only heat came from a convection oven. "You're leaving." The voice cut through the drone of the wind, low and steady. Maeve didn't jump. She simply turned. Adrian Vico walked toward her across the wet tarmac. He was alone. There were no bodyguards, no armored SUVs, no entourage of yes-men. He wore a charcoal overcoat, the collar turned up against the chill, his hands deep in his pockets. He looked different, lighter perhaps, or maybe just more focused. The shadows that usually clung to him seemed to have receded, replaced by a sharp, predatory clarity. "I finished the job, Adrian," Maeve said, her voice steady, though her pulse hammered a different rhythm against her wrist. She patted the pocket of her coat. "My father can come home now. We're going to open a small bakery in Vermont. Something quiet. Something where no one points a gun at me before breakfast." Adrian stopped a few feet away, invading her personal space, just enough to be felt, but not enough to threaten. He studied her face, his dark eyes searching for the truth behind her words. "Quiet," Adrian repeated, tasting the word as if it were a foreign spice. "You think quiet suits you, after everything." "It's what I wanted," Maeve replied, though the conviction in her voice was thinner than she intended. "I was a ghost when I came here. I should go back to being one." "You were never a ghost, Maeve. You were a dormant volcano," Adrian countered. He took a step closer, the rain darkening his hair. "I destroyed the marriage contract this morning. The Banks alliance is dead. I am a free man, the sole architect of the Vico empire." "Congratulations," Maeve said, gripping the strap of her bag tighter. "You have your kingdom." "A kingdom is vulnerable without a queen who can see the knives coming before they are thrown," Adrian said, softly. The intensity in his gaze locked her in place. "I don't need a wife to look pretty at galas. I don't need a political hostage. I need a partner, someone who knows that power isn't given, it's taken." Maeve looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man who had stepped between her and a beating in a restaurant kitchen. She saw the man who had handed her the weapon to take down his own fiancée, because he trusted her judgment more than his own security detail. "Are you offering me a job, Adrian?" she asked, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "Head of security, or maybe you need a new butler." "I'm offering you a partnership." Adrian corrected his voice, dropping to a register that vibrated in her chest. "Equal shares, 50-50. No more hiding in the kitchen. No more serving from the shadows. You run the intelligence and internal security. I run the logistics and the streets. We rule together." He extended a hand. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. Maeve looked at the plane again. The pilot was signaling that he was ready for takeoff. Vermont, flour, yeast, early mornings. Silence. Then she looked at the skyline of New York in the distance, jagged, chaotic, dangerous, and alive. She thought about the rush of adrenaline when she had disarmed Charlotte. She thought about the feeling of standing beside Adrian, two predators acknowledging each other in a room full of prey. A bakery sounds incredibly boring, she admitted, the realization settling over her like a warm coat. Adrian stepped closer, closing the final distance. He took her hand, the hand with the calluses from the skillet, the gun and years of survival. He didn't kiss the back of it like a gentleman courting a lady. He turned it over and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture of reverence for the violence she was capable of. "Stay," he whispered against her skin. Maeve let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. She let the heavy duffel bag slide from her shoulder. It hit the wet tarmac with a final dull thud, anchoring her to this new reality. "If I stay," she said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous spark, "I'm not wearing a uniform, and I'm certainly not pouring anyone's wine. You'll wear whatever you want." Adrian smiled, a genuine, rare expression that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "But I suggest something bulletproof. We have a lot of work to do." He didn't let go of her hand. He turned, leading her away from the plane and toward the sleek black car waiting at the edge of the airfield. The waitress who had been invisible was gone, left behind on the rainy tarmac, along with the duffel bag of a past life. In her place walked the only woman who had dared to challenge the Mafia boss's fiancée, and in doing so had won the heart of the devil himself. The rain poured down around them, but it couldn't touch them. They didn't need shelter from the storm. They were the storm. Maeve proved that true strength isn't about the title you hold, but the actions you take when your back is against the wall. She went from pouring champagne to controlling the empire because she knew her own worth when no one else did. Charlotte Banks had money and influence, but she lacked character, and in the end, that cost her everything. In a world of wolves, don't be the sheep, and don't be the loud dog barking at the gate. Be the lioness waiting in the tall grass. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and romance, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Who should we write about next? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.